it now became very clear that open source is a successful way to develop in software. So all the companies, Facebook, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, they're all built upon a backbone of open source projects. In fact, Microsoft is the leading contributor to open source projects right now.
So here with us is Marcin Jakubowski, or for those who are Polish speakers, Marcin Jakubowski. And so thank you for being on the show. This is a long time in the making in terms of happening. I know you're super busy, but we're going to be talking about open source hardware, open source ecology, what you're doing over there. We're going to talk a little bit maybe about your experience with TED and how that got you on the journey where you are right now. And so thank you for being on the show, man.
Yeah, well, thanks, Adrian. So glad to be here.
So open source hardware, let's start with that. What is it and why does it matter?
Yeah, so open source hardware is basically it's a paradigm. It's like people may have heard of open source software. Open source hardware, it's a development methodology where blueprints for hardware become open source. So open source, what does open source mean? There's 4 freedoms. One is you can view the so-called source code, which is blueprints. Like in software, you have code. Here we have the 4 freedoms of open source. Let's start with open source software are the freedom to view the code, to use it, to modify it, and then to sell it also. So there's commercial freedom at the end. So for hardware, that means that the blueprints are open, meaning that people can collaborate. So develop things in an open way as opposed to patented ways. People can collaborate, build upon each other's work, and also make that a part of their livelihood. So economic freedom is a big part of this, where at the end of the day, if you have open blueprints, you're able to make things like physical artifacts, anything from stuff like we do, which is 3D printers or tractors or houses. We're talking about blueprints for these being open. And why does that matter? It matters to balance out access and to accelerate innovation. Because if we talk about the current silos and of proprietary development, a lot of people are reinventing the wheel. The idea here is to do a different way that can involve more people and then distribute the knowledge that's generated, like Wikipedia, to everybody, so that on the hardware front, we're talking about creating real physical infrastructures and real artifacts of day-to-day life. And for that reason, in order to open up access to distributing wealth, open source hardware in particular is critical to that mission.
Why do you think it's going to be successful? I mean, open source software is successful. We have Linux as one of sort of like the poster child of open source software.
Yeah.
And the concept is that people are contributing code, they're co-developing code, they're building this product. Yet it's open source. Everybody can take a copy of it and make their own variation of it. At the end of the day, for like Linux, especially those more popular ones like Red Hat and that kind of got commercialized, they got purchased, and so they are successful now, but they kind of went back into the commercial zone. And so what will make open source hardware as successful as open source software? Because it is a little bit more difficult to implement, right, than open source software, vastly, I'd say, because like open source software is just like so ethereal in a sense that anybody can just write code from anywhere. You can be in the desert in the middle of nowhere. You have access to internet. You can submit your code, and there it is. With open source hardware, you're dealing with physical things. You're building physical things, and so what is your prediction, and why do you think it's going to be successful?
Yeah, it now became very clear that open source is a successful way to develop in software. So all the companies, Facebook, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, they're all built upon a backbone of open source projects. In fact, Microsoft is the leading contributor to open source projects right now. It's a major shift from even 4 years ago when Steve Ballmer, the ex-executive of Microsoft, called Linux a malignant cancer that's going to ruin their business. Well, now it's very clear. It's simply the preferred way because it works. And yes, it's much easier than hardware. Now with software, you're talking about the cost is your electrons in the grid plus your time. With hardware, you're talking about materials, logistics, budgets for things that cost more than electrons. So if you want to build a tractor, you need materials.
Right.
You need to organize people. You need to organize logistics and so forth. So much harder package. But why will it succeed? I mean, the idea goes back, I would say, to kind of like Peter Diamandis talks about the 5Ds. Like, as long as you can digitize something, and design now can be digitized, just like software. If you can digitize something, that lends itself to massive copying, massive replication. So with the digital front, you have CAD design software that allows you to digitize physical artifacts and transfer them and share them. And then you have digital fabrication, things like 3D printers or CNC machines, robots that can now take that source code and then replicate it widely. So the same kind of paradigm that applies in software in terms of easy transferability or easy reproducibility of artifacts now becomes feasible in hardware because of modern technology. We've got CNC, we've got internet, and we've got communication and collaboration platforms. And that to me makes open hardware simply inevitable. In my world, I mean, that's what we're working on. But as you get more efficient, just like in software, people are saying you're going to be more efficient if you develop software together. Absolute same principle applies to hardware. And of course, it's much more complex because the things you're wrangling there are much more difficult to wrangle.
The idea of open source hardware and its implementation, strikes me on the surface as difficult because I'm like the typical business approach is we design something, a company designs something, it patents it, it protects it any way it can, does proprietary stuff in order to kind of to have the grab on it, and then when they release it, they have full control over it. If you need to service something, you need to go back to them. This would really kind of cannibalize their business in a way when you have something like, hey, I can design a tractor and I'm going to share the plans with everybody and everybody can build it. So it is a threat from one perspective to those companies. How do you see that? How do you see open source hardware coexisting with your commercial?
Right. I think the pattern there would be the same as software, which is software, at first you're like, oh, you're going to cannibalize us, but then everybody learns and everybody does it. It's just going to be normal, just like there. To me, it's just a matter of efficiency. If when we talk about cannibalize, it's not cannibalize like people won't have something to do now, like the tractors are going to get worse. No, they're actually going to get better.
Right.
We're going to the idea there is distributing production, so solving the last frontier of the current economy, which is distribution. But the wealth across the world is very unevenly distributed, and here we have a chance to decentralize, distribute for everybody's benefit and access. And the state of art will only improve. There's tons of people out there who don't have access today that, given the tools and opportunities, would contribute to all of this. So I look at it as right now, even though it seems otherwise, we're in a stone age of innovation. I mean, so much of the work that goes on is about reinventing the wheel, everybody competing to do the same thing. Like say 100 car companies making all inferior cars than they could do if they all worked together, or something like that. It simply has to be a new paradigm where we shift in how we think about our physical world or just abundance in general. Right now, the whole economy comes from a scarcity viewpoint, a scarcity mindset, and this is what we're trying to change here. So it's the world will go on, yes, and it can be better, and it's about shifting people's paradigms of how simply a collaborative economy versus a competitive economy.
Right. So why do you think collaborative economy has a chance with competitive? Because the argument on the competitive economy model is that things get better because companies compete. right? They get better because, Honda is making a Honda and Toyota is making Toyota and Ford is making Ford, and then they have to compete. So every one of them is trying to outsmart, outrank, outperform the other ones. And that's the kind of classical model which people say like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Obviously everybody wants to make a better product because then the market wants to buy the better product. How does that work with open source hardware?
I would start by saying that's a mindset. There's nothing that says that by competing, you're going to get a better product. I think a lot of that is societal conditioning back from when we emerged from the cave and we started competing and killing each other and stealing resources. And that pretty much continues today. But just look at the software model. To make a translation, it's the same argument you can make. There, it's simply, no, competition does not make you a better product. It's simple economic interest for you to work with others and generate a common core. Now, people still proprietize the stuff that goes on top of that common core, but at least at the level of a common accessible core, like the Linux framework or whatever, Apache or whatever, any of the back end of the internet, people are contributing to those common projects so that everyone can use them and use them for their own needs. So there's a lot of economic activity that comes out of that anyway. So I don't think these things are so far removed from the way business is done today. At the end of the day, you create a product and you sell it. That's essentially it. It's not such a far cry, but I think the biggest deal here is how we think about that whole problem of production or collaboration or how the economy goes forward. We have these preconceptions where we think, oh, this only can go a certain way. But no, there's many ways of doing things.
I agree with you that it has to go through a mind shift. We have to kind of evolve to thinking that collaborative effort is going to be better for everyone than these proprietary things that are kind of hamstringing us right now. A good example of that, I think, is that there is a built-in obsolescence to because it's still leaning on a economical model where companies have to make money and they have to satisfy shareholders and they have to satisfy the investors and continue to grow the companies. They focus on like, how can we make more money with it, right? Because everything is still rooted on how much money is this going to bring. And so even when they produce a good product, now if the product is too well designed, now it's like, ooh, shit, like if we're going to build something that's going to last you a lifetime, that's not good, because now suddenly this thing is not, you're going to buy one and not buy one forever, from us. So let's make it so that it wears out, so that it breaks down, and so on, right? And so now the focus is going to be on replacing. Yes, they will still evolve and improve the product, right? But it's the modus operandi is still in there, where you will be like, this is not going to be as well designed as possible. It's going to be just well enough that you will get enough of value. I'm going to spend $100 for this drill, and it's going to last me a year or 2 or 5 or whatever it is, but it will not last me a lifetime because it wasn't designed to last a lifetime, right? So that mind shift has to happen where we design things that are in the collaborative, the way I see it, in the collaborative open source hardware collaborative model, people will not have that. They will be designing the best that's possible to design, right?
Yeah.
So that's the argument for that.
You said it. I would say that the planned obsolescence is a big deal. That's a big essential part of the current economy, and that's how a lot of the economy works. But open source lends itself to exactly the opposite of that, because if you have the blueprints and you have the means to produce things, and we talk about the idea of open source microfactories, many communities having these very advanced or collaborative digital fabrication centers, so what we call the open source microfactory with your 3D printers and CNC machines and robots and other just production infrastructure that can be developed and shared digitally. And then, of course, you have a global collaborative effort of design that feeds those kinds of facilities. But in there, if every community has that, then we have the possibility to build things that we understand, build things that now we can repair forever or understand because they're no longer black boxes. Right. If you simply have the blueprints, you can either fix or maintain something for a lifetime. You get to be the deciding factor when something breaks, not what the company designed because you don't have any access to blueprints or to parts or anything. You're pretty much you don't own the product owns you, or the company owns you.
What do you think is going to make it succeed in terms of like what is needed? Is it like a global shift that has to happen? What's needed in order for people to grab on it? You're doing a lot of good work, and we're going to talk about what you're doing shortly to kind of propagate this idea, this model, and everything. I mean, it's kind of like shifting, from like Stone Age to the Bronze Age to like all of that. Is it the same way in a way?
From my viewpoint, so I study this is my life, but what I'm seeing missing right now is a super clear example where we show that the open source methodology for hardware results in a superior product on schedule, on time. So, and this is where actually this year we're mentioned a little bit about the cordless drill, but we're launching a challenge to design the world's first open source 3D printed professional grade cordless drill that's also made from waste plastic. So the plastic recycling infrastructure is in there too. And that sounds like, okay, well, what's that gonna do? Well, there's a lot of 3D printers out there. Many people have them. We're teaching people how to design collaboratively. So we're aiming to launch this project where it's an incentive challenge. So people are competing, but our rules are not about competition. The rules will be completely about collaboration. So upload your designs, upload, download as rapidly as possible. You get rewarded for uploading early and often. The rules are going to be designed for complete collaboration. But the bottom line is, we need a clear example where there's some artifact which is visible, an economically significant product. So the cordless drill we chose because it's a $10 billion global market. Our goal is within 3 years to show that, okay, distributed production by individuals all over the world are actually capturing a majority of that market, of that $10 billion market. Now that would be a very clear example that we've developed a product that's better, faster, stronger, predictable timescale, absolutely open source and collaborative, and the production of this is distributed throughout the world. Right now, there's like 4 companies that have 80% of the market share in cordless drills. So that's what we are trying to do, show one example where it's absolutely clear and undoubted that the open source technique has succeeded. Now, that already has happened, but nobody noticed, and that was with the 3D printers. So 3D printers, since the patents ran out early 2000s, the entire consumer 3D printing industry today is based on an open source RepRap project. It's an open source project for designing the 3D printer called RepRap. Right now, most of the companies that are out there, they are derivatives of that project. They all built upon all that open knowledge that was generated when the patents ran out. So that example is already there. The biggest company, the company I believe makes the most printers, I believe that's Prusa. I mean, they're still an open source company. They completely derive from that project. So that revolution has happened, but somehow nobody noticed. Like, this is not like on Wall Street Journal where they have a report that says, wow, open source has finally dominated an entire industry. So for whatever reasons, and I don't really understand why, but I think it's a lot with industrial inertia where some of the incumbents in the 3D printing world, I don't know, like the mainstream media might kind of be biased towards more of the older companies. But anyway, we need one case in the world where that becomes absolutely clear that open source has succeeded in better products and on a regular timescale, because predictable timescale, because the RepRap project itself, that took years. That was a large disorganized project where a lot of people were just working on it in their spare time, and there was not a lot of organization, but altogether the whole movement pushed the state of art forward to the point that successful companies can emerge, and in fact most of the current companies. So there you go.
Well, I think my comment on why this didn't make such a huge splash, that all these print 3D printers right now, or derivatives from the RepRap open source project, is because when people buy a printer, they hear about 3D printers. So I think it's a problem of marketing in a way, because when people hear about printers, they're like, oh wow, that's pretty cool. I'm going to buy something like that. Tinker in my little shop over here and play with it. But they don't see the pedigree of that printer, whatever they bought. They don't see that this is a child of a project that was open source. That you see the final product. They don't see that made with open source or something like that. It's like the Intel has the little Intel Inside logo and thing. It's almost like every printer that was derived from open source project should have like a label like that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I see this Intel Inside on my computer here. We should coin our little label Open Source Inside and make it prominent. I mean, we do try to make it prominent, like in all our advertising. So on our website, opensourceecology.org, you can actually buy our printers, but we make that central. It's like, this is 100% open source, intended for distributive enterprise, meaning that if you want to produce this, we'll teach you. That's part of our work. It's to distribute this enterprise.
Right. So let's go back now that we kind of hit the beginning of this show hard with like specifics about open source hardware.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some history. Let's talk about you, and let's talk about how did you get into this. You are a TED fellow. You had a really awesome TED talk, and actually this is the a little snapshot from your original talk, Open Source Blueprints for Civilization, a TED Talk in 2011. And since then, so let's talk about what you proposed in that talk and what happened next, and then where you are now.
Yeah. Well, let's back up from that. Where did that come from? So I think we should back up to the PhD program.
Yes, let's go all the way back to your education and what you were doing. Yeah.
Because this is really what informs it, so it's important. So in the PhD program that I was in, the farther I went, the more useless I felt in terms of making a difference in the world. So I was studying abstract stuff that didn't even exist. Now, at that time, I also noticed one thing in my research program was that I couldn't talk openly about the stuff that I was doing, and that hit me in a hard way. It's like, what are we doing here in a public institution? I can't talk openly and share and learn from others because we've got some hot stuff that if people took it, they might beat us for funding or whatever. So that's part of the system. And when I noticed that, it's like, wow, it's like, what a waste. Also another episode there, so we were using, back in that time, we were using actually Macs for our computer platform. And then one of my peers showed me Linux for the first time. I was like, what's this? It's like, so he showed me that this is a system that you can download, you can use it for free. You can install whatever software for free and modify it how you want. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. So that's when I was actually first ever introduced. It probably was like 2000, year 2000 or so, or 2002, when I first heard about the concept of open source. And then I thought that was really cool. And piecing together the aspect of that I couldn't talk openly, I started thinking, well, what would happen if we actually really collaborated with others? Noticing that I can't talk about my hot stuff to others, and wouldn't it be better if I could, and then we can actually combine our ideas together? But that's not how things work. So many places, and that's probably like one of the cases where, this is probably happening everywhere throughout academia and other sectors. So got me thinking too, well, what's going on with this total competitive waste all over the place? So the last year of my PhD, I essentially started the Open Source Ecology project, just got a website and started to formulate the idea, okay, well, what would the economy look like, or what would the world look like if we truly collaborated? And so those notions of unbridled collaboration at that point came up. But it wasn't a few years later until so after finishing grad school, the first thing any movement entrepreneur would want to do, or any person interested in rebooting civilization would want to do, is get some land. So I did that. So
right.
I farmed some land actually outside of Madison, and we got our own land eventually in Missouri. But that's the first thing. So we got into land, and I got whooped by the reality of this. So I didn't have the practical skills or tools to make a small farm or whatever my experiment was succeed. And that's where the idea of the global village construction set came about. So just started prototyping. First thing was that, the story in the TED talk where my tractor broke, paid to get it repaired, then it broke again. I was $2,000 down. Like the actual story there was, I paid $2,000 for this thing. 2 weeks later, it breaks again to the same thing. It's like, uh-oh, this is absolutely unsustainable.
Right.
And I said, if I'm having this problem, then I bet you there's many other people that have this problem. So I said, okay, we're going to build ourselves an open source tractor. Kind of spun from there. So the open source brick press, the tractor, very fundamental things that you'd need on a piece of land to survive and thrive. The brick press for making housing, the tractor for some agriculture and other utility duties. So I decided at that point, it's like, wow, this is a huge impact we could have if we just open source these designs so that anyone can build and maintain them at a fraction of the cost. And all the stuff about industrial productivity on a small scale, or just the idea that we equalize the balance of power from the countries that have and have not. Because being born in Poland, I've seen a have-not country before the wall fell down, right? We were both there with the tanks rolling down our streets. That's the memories from the year before I left to America. So seeing that drastic difference between one country that has everything like America and then other countries that's like, they still have all the same resources, and they've got land, they've got rocks, plants, sunlight, soil, water, but one economy is completely advanced, another is completely backwards. It's like, why does that happen? So started to really ask those questions, and a lot of the answers came through, just the way we develop things, and the idea of collaborative, distributive, open versus control, and one country's going to beat up another, or power relations, all of that. All those thoughts started coming up, and wanted to do something about it. And I wanted to do something about it on a material front, simply because material goods affect our lives in such tangible material ways, by definition.
Right.
So if we want to change the world, we got to start with hardware, not software, but hardware, which is more tangible. It's still 80% of the economy.
The thing that you were talking about on the TED Talk is not only open source hardware, but you had initially, and you're still working on it right now at Open Source Ecology, you're working on this global village construction set, and I love that. I think that tapped to like a public's psyche, people thinking like, wow, what would it take to like restart a civilization? Like if I would, let's say, imaginarily, like there's a new planet, whatever, and we need all the tools and everything in order to rebuild everything, and we have nothing. What would it be? And so you packed on, all these designs, and you're working on all those machines and tools in that construction set, that could fit on like one DVD. And for those of you who don't know what DVD is, it's just a storage media. Now it's all in the cloud. Who knows who's going to be watching this and when, but yeah, fitting all those designs and plans, and then just sharing them so that people can build and make them on their own. One of the things that was really, I think, caught public's eye was your compressed earth brick machine, which essentially you had an auger, you dug up some topsoil, you fed it into a hopper, it munched on it, and then out come bricks, and people were like, it was just amazing, because like now you can build this machine, you got the plans for it, you can use the materials that are around you, so you don't have transportation costs and material costs, and you can build a building out of that. It's amazing. Those were my understanding is that those were replicated all over the place, all over the world, and in many different countries, and so it's been
about a dozen for the brick press. Maybe we could get into the replication idea, but altogether, the traction has not occurred yet. So we're still growing. We're like in an incubating stage. There's been about a dozen. So every so often I hear about a person in one country or another.
Right.
They built a press. Like my favorite one was like in Nicaragua. They actually built several buildings and a whole production facility where we're cranking out these bricks with what looked to be our machines. So that's awesome. It's great to hear. But it's far from that major transformative impact, so we're still working on that, and we're just recognizing just how much effort it takes to take a product to completion. So a lot of this to date has been prototyping, like the last decade.
Right.
It's largely prototyping. But now we're saying, okay, there's that other aspect that we kind of forgot for that last decade, and that is, what is your product? The actual products that people can buy or make very easily. So lowering the barriers, so you don't have to be a super skilled person. You just have a buy button on your website. So at this point, it's a lot about enterprise development.
How do you see, why do you think it didn't catch on in such an explosive way that the whole planet is talking about it, saying like, oh my goodness, look at this. Look at this guy. He designed this thing that's like saving lives, giving people shelter, giving people not only shelter, but also education. Because now when you have access to these plans, you can just download it, you can replicate it, and then you can improve it and submit the improvements back to the source. And that should have caught like wildfire. Why do you think it hasn't?
Yeah. No, that's a very interesting thing. I remember publishing back in 2008 on a brick press, and I was like, I actually asked myself, holy cow, this is so powerful. Here we can make a machine for like, at that time it was like $4,000. Nearest competitor, if you were to buy it from somebody else, would be like $52,000. It's like, can I let it go? And of course, I mean, that was kind of like the last moment I ever would ask that question, because I thought, it's like, wow, like what am I giving away here? So, but I said, okay, no, I'm committed to making a better world. This is not about me, it's about helping everybody. So that was clear. But at that time, I thought that, man, this is going to just go wild all over the place with these kinds of economics that we're demonstrating this such drastic cost reduction. But no way, Jose. That did not happen at all.
How come?
So, yeah, I'd say that on one side is the product needs to be very highly refined. So one of the things then was, I'm not sure if we had, at that time, actually, we did not have the machine that's actually digitally fabricated. So one of the improvements was it's always about, okay, make it easier for people. So after that release in 2008, we converted the machine. So 2011, we had one that was digitally cut by either CNC laser or CNC torch table that you can just give to a fabricator, give them all the plans, they cut out all the parts for you, and then you got to weld them. So it's like much, much easier. It allows you to build the press like what we can do right now with a group of people in a single day, as opposed to like a week by a skilled fabricator. So we can now do these swarm builds. But everything is about the ease of replication on one side. So on one side, we made things super easy. On the other side, it's like, make the product that somebody can just click buy, because most people do not have the patience. Like, say you're a skilled fabricator, even for the brick press, I would not say, I mean, why doesn't every single fabricator replicate our brick press and sell it? Well, it's about business. It's about an enterprise. That's called running an enterprise. So the full connection from somebody just taking the blueprints to running as a full enterprise, that's a far cry. And that's what we're working on right now, to make that very easy. So we are starting things like our startup camps. And so this summer we have the Summer of Extreme Design Build, where we continue to take the products to that level of finish that makes it super easy to replicate. For example, our micro track.
Right.
Or the house that I'm sitting in right now, the Seedico home. That's my office here. Man, those things are ready for replication, but it takes a certain level of skill to get there.
Right.
You know, from one perspective, I say, we built this. It was an epic effort. It's not super refined, but that's perfect fuel for the avid entrepreneur to take and productize it. But it's not happening that easily, because it's to have that kind of a broad skill base, the vision to collaborate, you know, the entrepreneurial spirit, that's pretty rare to find that all in one place. And I think also the other part there is the open culture. Like if somebody sees that, oh, our plans are open, an entrepreneur might be like, oh, well, I don't really have an advantage here. They don't see it as an advantage. So they might not replicate.
So it's still that kind of so it's still that kind of old mentality of like, hey, if it's open source, like what kind of advantage do I have to actually do it and get into that business of actually doing it?
That's right. So there are many barriers that I can point to, but the number one is simply, I mean, we have been de-skilled. Any of our practical skills have been removed by schooling, and I've seen that in my school. I mean, my own school career, like the farther you go, the less practical you become. to the point that by the end of your PhD, you're theorizing about stuff that doesn't exist. I mean, that's kind of the industry standard for your PhD program. So far removed from what I was after, and it's about pressing world issues.
Your journey to on the with open source ecology, open source hardware, like you said, it's still sort of like an inception, even though you've been working on it for a while. What do you think has to happen in order for it to like fully explode? Is there like a critical mass that you need to achieve that this is going to be like the tipping point where there's enough of people doing it, there's enough of examples? I mean, the one thing that you said was like, we need like a solid example that open source hardware design and this collaborative model is going to kick ass of like standard commercial designs and practices, right? So that's kind of like we need like that poster child in order to be like the splash on the newspapers and magazines. Like, look, these guys worldwide, they designed something that's way better than what all these other companies can design, and it's now open source. You guys can download it and make it yourself, or you can buy a kit and assemble it yourself. So that's definitely step one. What else do you think is needed in order to succeed, to kind of shift this mentality?
Yeah, the latest in our thinking is culture, because we're finding now that this has nothing to do with feasibility or cost, practicality. I mean, better, faster, stronger is going to apply just like in software. So what's the missing link? And that is the collaborative culture. So thinking about that at length, it seems to me that in software, why that became so clear and visible in a relatively short period is that because the original hackers and the original software was open source. So a lot of the open source community has been familiar with that culture. That culture at least existed, even though, of course, like Microsoft and Apple came about and they were very proprietary. But open source was not a new thing there. It was in the background. So, and then before long, it turned out, oh yeah, it actually makes economic sense too, of course, because you can collaborate. Now, with hardware, we have 200 years of industrial history where proprietary is the norm.
Right.
And I think that's one of the biggest things we're struggling with culturally. Now, what does it mean in practice? In practice means that from the time we leave kindergarten, we're taught to share in kindergarten, but after that, it's everything about competition. So in high school, you might still have some of your innocence left where you think that you can collaborate, but as soon as you get into the job market, after college, in college, everything turns proprietary. Companies fund research. When you go to a company, it's all about non-disclosure agreements,
right,
and patents and all of that as your competitive advantage.
Right.
For us, it's the opposite is the advantage. The collaborative advantage is what we look at, i.e. you can develop things more inexpensively, and you can get to what's already been shown in software. So I don't need to go on that. We know that's the case. So why is it not happening, and what can we do? For us, what we're doing right now is, so we did start a program of which we call the Open Source Microfactory Steam Camp. But a huge part of that is to address that one gap in society that's prominent, and that is the collaborative culture. So the idea that you actually can do better by cooperating. So we just practice that in the Steam Camp. So Steam Camps are about learning the tool set, which means wikis, open editable docs, open design software like FreeCAD, collaboration architecture, and processes that are derived from standard product development, just project management and all of that. You can do that, and we're developing innovative techniques where we want to scale those to thousands of people working on it at the same time, and that's exactly what we'll do in an incentive challenge. Right. But the missing link is training people up, first of all, to say that, yes, this stuff is possible, and you can make better products and make better everything, open source everything, and it can actually work. So that's the level we're working on right now, promulgating that through our Steam camps as one way. So we're trying to scale that program up. The other thing is the incentive challenge. That's going to hit the news. So in that, we expect a couple of thousand people to collaborate. Now, if that works, we have a chance to change economic history here, because if this paradigm works, then it can be applied to any other product or hardware good.
So two questions. So two questions. A, just for those who don't know, what is a STEAM camp? And two, how do you see this once this challenge is going to be happening? How do you see that? How do you predict, or how do you envision how this is going to change the economic model of what's happening right now with the commercial aspect?
Yeah, good question. So what is the STEAM camp? And you can show the link as well. But the STEAM camp, we call it the Open Source Microfactory STEAM camp, but science, technology, engineering, art, and math. But it's basically a public event. Sign up for this workshop, and a very immersive, intensive 9-day workshop that we're running, where you learn. So the first day, you build a 3D printer using our open source modular construction method, and you add on different additions like a pen plotter for CNC plotting, like a CNC little drill, and other things. We end up building a Raspberry Pi tablet. There's project days where we all collaborate. The idea is that we run multiple events at the same time. So those 9 days means we have several locations. Last event was 3 locations. We're aiming to increase that up to, our goal is about 24. And that's only the beginning. Just like I always say, that's only the beginning, like in my TED Talk. But imagine 24 events at the same time, say 24 people each. You've got an army of about 500 people that can be collaborating. In those 5 project days, you can get some major design done pending your ability to leverage an effective process. So for us, an effective process is one that's modular, designed, where we break things apart, just like in software, into very small parts and develop them. We create part libraries that people can then build upon continuously, to the point that we develop effective open source products for what we call the open source everything store. So basically, think about right now, 80% of the stuff that's on Amazon could be produced in an open source microfactory, a basic digital fabrication facility with 3D printers, CNC machines, maybe robotic arms and other things. Small scale facility, you can do a lot of that. So that's the STEAM camp part. Now let's answer on the challenge, incentive challenge. What is the intended outcome of hosting a design challenge where we design a cordless drill? Sounds simple. Well, for one, there's an aspect of recycling in there, so that's one aspect. But the ideal situation is that out of this incentive challenge, which is probably going to run 6 months, and 6 months from start, after the collaborative, not competitive, but collaborative effort, it's not a team competing against another team. You get rewarded for contributing to the final product on all its levels, from the product design to the enterprise design that successfully produces these. So our goal is explicitly to have 100 or 200 people who take the work product of that challenge, meaning up to, okay, how do you build the machines that build that 3D printer? So that means that involves some 3D printers, possibly a torch table, but maybe not. The recycling machines, definitely. So it's about distributing that economic operation to many people. So the idea there is we either hire the people or they work independently, but the idea is to create what would most aptly be called an open source franchise. So it's a collaborative effort where all the product development happens collaboratively. We all are contributing to this common pool. And as Open Source Ecology, we're providing the support infrastructure for enterprise startup for all these operations to start up around the world. So within 6 months of the challenge, we hope to be producing drills in 50 to 100 locations around the world.
Help me understand, how is the winner going to be picked out of this challenge? If everyone is going to be collaborating, how do you pick a winner? If it's not a competition of sorts, how do you pick a winner?
We haven't gotten the details of that exactly as far as what the formula is, and we won't disclose that for gaming purposes. But the general idea is that you reward, so you track work product by people uploading designs to the wiki. Everyone keeps a work log. Everyone contributes to part libraries, and you can simply see people's activity. So we will reward how often people upload stuff, how they comment on existing design, how they collaborate with one another. So for example, if they provide a design review that says, okay, this is a good idea for a reason X, that is counted as a plus. So everything, you get points for every single action where you're not hiding anything, but you're inputting into the system and helping others do better. So we'll probably have a number of prizes, probably like a grand prize and like top 10 prizes, and maybe there's going to be like a whole bunch of small ones. But the reward that we're looking at is we're looking at about 200K for the prize itself. So we're going to fundraise
that's significant. It's quite a significant.
It's plenty of money to go around there. But the idea about an incentive challenge is that the amount of effort that people put in for that reward is actually much larger. So we're not buying $200,000 worth of research and development. It's more like 10 or 100 times that. That's just how these things work. But we're using this format, the incentive challenge, to make this happen in our particular case. So we have the details of the judging will have to be determined. We can use basic metrics of wiki edits and submits, commits to our repositories, where you can just track that all and give people points for doing that.
Right.
So and we'll have a manager that manager or two that are constantly working with the people, providing the right direction. My role in it is going to be the keeper of the paradigm, basically, like of the rules, of the principles, kind of like the keeper of the principles. So I'm just going to be not designing. I'm going to be guiding people in design and more importantly in collaboration. How do you collaborate effectively? How do you make sure that your log is updated, that you're uploading on a continuous basis, that you're providing feedback? So we'll be teaching this whole community of people how to do that. And this is just a small step to what we see as a simple collaborative design method. So just like Linux, you've got Linux Foundation. They basically steward the Linux project, the various open source development projects. People contribute to that common pool. What we see here is that we steward a process where meaningful, high-quality design is generated, and then people can draw from that. So the same model as in Linux. And doing that with the Cordless drill challenge as a first example, and normalizing as a way to do business. Simply, it's simply showing that okay, it's cheaper, better, more effective to do this way because the results actually happen.
Right. So one thing that kind of came to my mind is in terms of how are you going to use metrics to kind of award whoever's going to be the winning, the winner of this. I like the fact that you're going to have like several prizes. It's not going to be just like a grand prize and nobody else. It's going to be grand prize and like the top 10 maybe, or top 3, what have you. The complexity that I think that's going to strike you is not every, so let's say we're designing this cordless drill. Not every part that you're going to design in the drill has of equal weight, right? In a sense, like, you have one piece that may be more complex, motor maybe, than let's say just a casing. So that's going to be probably a challenge of its own. But I appreciate that, and I acknowledge that this is a evolving idea. So you're going to learn from this, and then the following competition or contest will have challenges will have have learned from this one and so on. But it is going to be interesting to see how you guys figure out how to comparatively judge the submissions and the contributions on different parts that are at different levels of complexity and design. That's going to be interesting.
As always, we kind of make the road by walking. We just dive into this experiment. It's a complete experiment. It's worth doing, absolutely. So let's see what comes out.
Right. What do you think is going to happen? Yeah. What do you think? What do you predict?
I am ready for some interesting surprises, because as we go along, we're pushing forward an aggressive schedule of our programming. We constantly meet new people. Opportunities are getting better and better. I think, when I look back on a project, every year is better. So then, I'm in my mud hut at the farm, and then all of a sudden, hey, I'm invited to the world stage. Hello, everybody. Great. And then other things like that happened that opened up a bunch of other stuff, like getting Shuttleworth Foundation Fellowship, all this publicity and all that. And that is not stopping. I think altogether, on one side, we're recognizing, wow, this stuff is difficult. This is like impossible. And the latest thing was just the recognition about open culture. Like initially it was proof of concept that show, okay, do these open source things actually work? Or are they going to suck? Well,
right.
the learning was very quick that, wow, these things are actually better than expected. Like, for example, the first brick press, I was hoping that when I did that, I'd get like 3 bricks a minute. And then I ended up getting like 10, using common available technology. Technically, it's not impossible. In fact, it's extremely encouraging, because once you see how powerful technology is, how enabling it is, it's like, wow, your mind changes as you get your hands on it and you understand it. So it has nothing to do with feasibility. Right now, we're at this point. It's an organizational challenge and a cultural challenge. So even if we had the best organization, that organization would have to include the creation of a new culture in society. Because right now, wow, we are having a very hard time finding people who are into the simple idea of open product development. Everyone talks about it, but at the end of the day, there's very few people that are doing it. And there's so many barriers to collaboration that that's been one of the things that, and so just to give you an example with the STEAM camps, so the STEAM camps, I made a very explicit effort to go out to all those people that naturally want to develop products together and collaborate. So that's like the Open Source Hardware Association list directory where they certify open source projects and products. I went out to like the Fab Labs, other places, YouTubers who I thought are open source. The turnout has been very low, like very, very low, to the point that right now, for the first event, which just happened in January, we had 3 instructors. So for example, one person out of the entire OSHWA list of say 100 or more that I contacted was like, yeah, let's do it. This is open source product development. We can work together and actually make something better and not worry about competing, because we're all going to succeed. The people that have that mindset are extremely rare, and it just blows me away. There's you'd think that it's easy, and it's like, yeah, it's a great idea, but as far as people who are actually doing it, extremely rare. So that's like the cultural barrier that we're trying to bridge, and it has to be at the point where, one of our missions is to do mass creation of sustainable livelihoods through open source. I mean, that's part of our game. And it has to come to that. We have to basically have the ability to say to people, okay, here's something you can do within the open source framework, and you make a living. So the STEAM Camp instructors are an example of that. Right. And we just got to get the enterprise level up. That's
right. I mean, that was one of the things that we originally talked about when I was at your Fab Lab. At your location. Open Source Ecology headquarters, let's call it that, in Missouri. And I told you, like, hey, you need to turn this into something that will provide people livelihood, something you have to monetize. I know that Open Source Ecology is a non-for-profit, but that doesn't mean that you guys shouldn't be making money to propagate this, because the reality is that the world that we live in right now is essentially driven by marketing and the awareness, and awareness costs eyeballs looking at this and considering things is going to cost money, because you need to market and advertise to people. But so what I'm really happy about seeing is that you've kind of adapted that idea and are doing those theme camps concurrently, which kind of ties in the collaboration, right? And you guys are learning from that. And you mentioned some of the obstacles in terms of collaboration. That collaboration is one of those kind of like evolving obstacles. What are some of the main obstacles in collaboration as it is right now?
So let's back up to the STEAM camps, where I must report that an initial hint of what we predict, which is get a bunch of people together with that explicit tool set and skill set to collaborate, and you can have magic happen. It's starting a little bit. There was evidence of this, like in the last STEAM camp, outside of meeting a couple of people that actually want to start similar operations or teach the STEAM camps, which has happened, or actually start microfactories in their local communities, that kind of stuff. There's interest there. But in the event itself, let's talk about that. We, for example, had our design of the pen plotter, the CNC plotter that draws you pictures using the CNC controlled axis, which is the same machine that the 3D printer is based on. So somebody made a design to improve that, so that they added the pen plotter attachment not as a separate tool head, which means that you'd have to take off the printer head and put on the plotter. They actually added the pen right on top of the print head, so the print head could function both as a plotter and a printer.
Right.
Awesome, cool. So that's a small example where, okay, now we're getting to collaborative innovation in a framework where that result is going to be open source and continue to be developed. Awesome. Okay, but you're asking, what are the challenges to it?
Yeah, in collaboration.
Challenges to collaboration. There's the cultural one I mentioned, and that is where the idea that it's very hard to find people that think that more can be done together. I mean, as obvious as that sounds,
that must be very frustrating.
It's just a recognition of how this works. I've been going through this recognition about the last 3 months. It blows me away. Like, the farther I get into this game, it's stuff that I'm learning just blows me away. First, it was the idea that, wow, these things work incredibly awesome and they're going to take over the world. Second, wow, and there's nobody to replicate it, even though this is the next $1 trillion economy. And now, wow, if this model can work for software, and it's obvious that it will work for hardware, we're just a decade or so away. Why is nobody jumping on it in larger numbers when we actually, at that point, we're saying, okay, here's a way you can actually make a living with this. Here's the open source Steam camps. We're actually going to pay you to run these. And still, like, very little. It's a high-risk entrepreneurial undertaking, but it did blow me away that the response was low. I would say low, and it's building. And it's like, as people see the reality, it's just kind of like the long walk to freedom. It takes a while for the transition to happen, and so we are definitely in this as an exponential organization. We're like still at the very base before the hockey stick explosion comes in, which I'm confident it will. But what are beyond the cultural, what are the other things? The other things are actually quite tractable. So over the years, we've been doing module-based designs. Basically, one of the huge keys to the success of open source software was the idea that they can break down a software product into very, very, very tiny bits. We've learned how to master that for hardware. It's not too hard. Whenever you have a design, you break it down into components, like the tractor. It's going to have an engine unit. It's going to have a frame. It's going to have the traction. It's going to have control. You break that down like that for any machine, about a dozen modules. Then you break that down further into subparts. But you can basically break down a complex product into modules, and then you can run through like 40 or so development steps through each module. So it's not a big deal to learn this kind of a technical ability to manage a complex product by breaking it apart into many, many parts. That's awesome. And the software now lets you do that. You've got wikis, you've got various project management software. The largest part about that is the kind of a cultural, once again, that technical process is limited not by the technical tools. It's limited by the framework that most people have in their mind. And interestingly, here's another one. We're finding that you'd think that a complete novice, so CAD is one of the main things we use. You'd think that an experienced CAD person would learn FreeCAD pretty fast. What we found out instead is that the absolute novice is able to learn FreeCAD much better than a CAD professional.
Why is that? Do you think it's because they have to unlearn what they've learned?
Yeah, yeah, it's absolutely that. And I was just talking to Katerina, my partner here, about that today, as I basically, because for the Steam Camps program, one of the requirements is that you learn FreeCAD. So we ran into a couple of people that were like, oh yeah, like they're masters of CAD. But it turned out they didn't want to learn FreeCAD, or couldn't, or like they had some resistance to it. Right. So it's amazing. And then there's another student that's signing up for the summer, and it took them like a day. They already learned it. Or another guy in another workshop here where I was able to teach them, a complete novice, to go into designing an object of any complexity pretty much, and actually exporting that as a print file all in 1 hour.
Wow.
So it's amazing. Like that's another thing. So yeah, just a thought I want to put out there, that of how the mindset is so important, because technically we've got all the tools, the technology we have. If we can go around the moon and make microchips, we've got technology. That's
Right.
not the issue. It's now the human element.
So so I think the main things this is just like keep on pushing forward to educate people to and then I think this cordless drill challenge is going to be something that's going to catch attention as well. Obviously, you guys going to be and I'm going to try to help out as well with blasting it all over the place and making it appealing to people and have a conversation around it. I think what you need is something that's just so sexy that people are like, oh my gosh, I have to be part of that. And
Yeah. No, I think that's coming, and it's just the difference between vision and execution. This is an entrepreneurial quest, and you just got to get really good. So for me, it's all about upping my entrepreneurial skill set on all levels. So I'm like growing like crazy right now.
Right.
You expressed about yourself.
The imagery that comes into my mind right now is when you say that this is still in the inception. It still had to catch on and everything. There was this video on YouTube, and I think I mentioned this on some other podcast where just imagine this lawn. Everybody's picnicking out. There's a bunch of people, and this one guy just gets up. You probably saw that video. You may have seen it. And this guy starts like dancing like crazy. And people are just like looking at him like, wow, geez, look at this crazy dude. Like, and then he has a first follower, someone who had enough courage to like, yeah, I'm going to join this dude. And he starts dancing and they go wild and crazy, just totally, blissful about it. And then a third guy, a third person joins them, and then another person. And now suddenly the people that were in majority are in the minority. They are looking at all these people dancing. Now it's a crowd. This leader started it, right? This crazy dude started all of that. And now it's like a huge movement. And now all those people who were initially like, whoa, that's just weird. Like, I don't want to be part of that. Now they're like, man, I should probably be part of that because like I'm out over here. And so I think that's kind of the same thing that's going to happen with open source hardware. It's like that shift of mentality is going to happen when that critical mass is going to build up, where you're going to have enough people doing it that everybody else is going to be like, oh yeah, sure, of course that's how we should do things. But that's you're the visionary. You are at the inception of it. You are the guy who's like still pushing something that some people are just like so entrenched in standard thinking. You can't blame them. I mean, this is what we've been cultured into, in a sense, that people are just can't even see beyond it. It's only by example. So I'm looking really forward to when you guys going to have some, that drill, cordless drill, because I think that's going to make a huge splash. So you mentioned that this is a $1 trillion economy. I think that should get people excited. Where do you get that number from?
$1 trillion economy is it's actually more like 30 trillion or so, as far as the hardware economy. What is the overall economy? It's about 100 trillion. What is the size of the first primary and secondary sectors? So primary is the extraction of all the materials, the rocks and plants and those things that the modern civilization is made from. Right. Second sector is manufacturing, all the production. So those are the sectors that lend themselves to open hardware. So you've got extractive, and of course in a regenerative sense, the circular economy, extraction of resource, circular cycling, and then manufacturing. Those are the two sectors. About 30% of the economy. The rest about 70 is the service sectors and all that. So the economy that open hardware will undoubtedly take over is about 30 trillion. So that means production of common things that we use every day. So you live in a house, you've got trees that were cut down, or concrete that was made, or the metal for the car that you drive. That's 30% of the world. That's 30 trillion. So
we were talking about the economy, how big the economy is in open source hardware. So I think that should get people excited about this, because like with, let's say even forget about the $30 trillion, $1 trillion is a massive number. That's a huge number. So I'm hoping that whoever is listening to this will check out Open Source Ecology. They will open up your work and just get excited about participating. Let's kind of start wrapping up with things. How do you want how people can get involved with what you're doing? What do you need right now to make this a success, to the next step?
Yeah, I mean, biggest thing right now is the biggest initiative is instructors joining the STEAM Camp program. So basically, if you're interested in learning how to collaborate on real product design of technology that matters, yeah, join it. So attend the camp and then learn to be an instructor. That's if you want to go into the deep dive. Otherwise, we have regular workshops, so you can, of course, sign up as a participant. If you, as we say in our promo video, did you ever want to design or build something but did not know where to start? Well, if that describes you, then this program is geared to address exactly that issue. So basically, getting hands-on skills to go from conception to CAD to 3D printing or other machines to realize your products. That's a very broad kind of a project. And the thing to keep in mind there is we're trying to create what we call I mentioned the open source everything store, the idea of this collaborative product development mastermind. So if you're an entrepreneur, I mean, we'd like you, but the thing is, we're trying to nail down our target market. That's one of our biggest things we're trying to do, because we know that the people we're trying to find here are kind of the five-legged dogs, because you got to be entrepreneurial, collaborative, open source, a teacher, like if you want to teach the camps. And what's the fifth one? You have to be able to build things. That's if you're looking to be the instructor.
Right.
But if you're talking about open source product development in general, yeah, it's an entrepreneurial kind of an endeavor where people have to say, okay, well, there's all these goods that we get in a store, but if you're excited about saying, okay, I can now collaboratively develop a real thing, an open source microfactory in my own community. I mean, the market for that is huge, but it's that initial gap of how do you start this whole enterprise. That's what we're working on. And we've got a few early adopters. We're being very aggressive about pursuing the STEAM camps to continue training people and just keep building it.
Right. You know, the thing that got me excited, and when we were talking about when I was at your place, is that, you know, if you build a model where people can take what you're doing at the headquarters and then just kind of can do it in their own communities, and the community can see how beneficial that is, because it's a stepping stone. The first thing is, well, before like this open source hardware and this ecology kind of grows into like what's accepted globally as a status quo, the first step is like, how do we teach kids? How do we teach adults? How do we teach all those who tinker, who build, who want to modify things, and those makers, creators, make a living out of this? And I think the model is like, they can take the structure that you have in open source ecology and replicate a shop at their local in their local communities, and then people can come in, kids can come in, adults can come in, they can learn everything from scratch, which is what you have at your STEAM shops, right? STEAM camps right now, which is like, hey, we'll teach you CAD, we'll teach you this, we're going to build a 3D printer, then you're going to, with a 3D printer, you're going to build parts. With those parts, you're going to build all the things that we're building and collaborating on. And you're going to learn collaboration everywhere in between all of those steps. And I think that you see such a valuable skill set and such a valuable set of, and just mindset change as well, that once that's going to get replicated locally in a lot of different communities, that's when you're going to have that biosmosis type of awareness that people are like, wow, okay, this works. And it's clearly beneficial because I want my kid to learn sciences. I want them to learn, practical things, and everything can be tied into sciences, into math, and all those subjects, and so that's what I'm excited about. I mean, we talked about that. I'm excited that you're pushing forward to that. I want to be one of your instructors as well. I'm going to be coming out to your headquarters and start co-teaching some of the things over there and getting on that path. I'm super excited. I would love to do that over here as well in Utah and get people involved. There is a maker community. It's just that I think that maker community is more of let's go to a shop, pay $20 a month so I have access to a 3D printer or something like that, and kind of leave it at that point. I think the next evolutionary step is what you're doing, which is teaching everything from A to Z, and then make it profitable to teach other people, and then communities recognizing the value of those instructors in their communities, doing these workshops and teaching people to do that, and participating in open source hardware and building that community globally.
Well, I think to add on to that, it's not only about teaching. It's a teaching and production model. So with the people that are produced in these camps, we're about open product development. We start certain projects like the Raspberry Pi tablet or a cordless drill or a vacuum robot. Those are the kind of projects we start during the camp. And then let's talk about the open source everything store, the collaborative product development mastermind, where we all join that, and then build that microfactory in your community. You can produce, you can teach. There's a solid economic base for making that happen. So you mentioned about, okay, let me go, you use the word maker. I don't particularly like that word. I like the word entrepreneur more. Maker is typically a hobbyist.
Yes.
And we're trying to say, no, this is not about hobbies. This is about the next industrial revolution and a change of global paradigm.
Right.
So if you are listening and this speaks to you, if you're the 5-legged dog with those 5 qualities I mentioned before, email me.
Yeah.
Let's do this. That's exactly what I'm responding to right now. There's certain people that are, in fact, one email I got was, hey, I'm one of the 5-legged dogs you're looking for. So we're looking to work together. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Like
well, listen, it was really great seeing you again and talking to you. I'm excited for you, what's happening in your domain, how you're pushing this forward. I definitely want to be part of it. I'm going to be talking about it. I'm going to be actually reaching out to some communities over here locally in Utah and see who would be interested in taking the journey of this, because I would love to kind of run the shop over here in Utah. Yeah. There's a lot of growth that's happening in the state. There's a lot of creative minds over here. They just don't know where to start. So I think what you just said is, hey, have you ever wanted to build something, make a living out of it? This is your chance. This is your place where you can do that. So we're going to be talking about that over here, and I'll get back to you with what I found out over here. I'd love to have you on the show again. Thank you for introducing me to all the TED Fellows. I only talked to Shubhendu right now, but there's a couple of others that you introduced me to, so I'm going to revisit them and see if I can have them. And I'm going to just end with one thing which I started talking about, then we got cut off, which is like how Shubhendu adopted your open source hardware model, in his business with growing high density trees in people's backyards. I mean, that just blew my mind when he was telling me about that.
Wait, I thought he had more of that mindset already. Did he say that he actually adopted more of it since he met us? Or?
Since he met you, yes. Yes. Watch the podcast, and you're going to see he says it that we did it in a standard way, a standard business practice, FIFA service and things like that. And then we said no, if you want to hire us, this is the price. But if you want to negotiate somewhere in between, we don't do that. You can have it for free, and it's open source. And so he adopted and he said that after talking to you and spending time with you and planting your trees over there. So you've had that impact in a totally different discipline, so to speak, and so it's phenomenal that it's catching what you're doing.
Is growing like crazy here too. Mutual benefit.
I'll send him the link to this podcast so you can kind of listen to this as well. Again, thank you so much. I'm pre-inviting you to the next podcast because I want to talk, and we're going to talk maybe a little bit more in more details. You're doing phenomenal work over there, and a lot of it. So put me on the calendar somewhere so we can chat a little bit more. I want to know the details and the lessons learned that you've learned and you want to share from the STEAM camps that you've been teaching and coordinating. I think that's going to be our next podcast where we're going to talk about that. So those who would want to get involved in doing this, they will get a little taster of what it is. What does it take to make this a successful event, and then that's going to probably be interesting to them, and that's going to take us on. So thanks a lot.
That's awesome. And then after that, so make sure we do one around the incentive challenge time, which is September 2nd or September 1st. So around that time we're launching, but we should talk about that because we'll have everything up on a website and all that. So look forward to it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Marcin.
Thanks for listening to a podcast with interesting people. Please subscribe and leave a review or comment.
And support us by sharing our episodes on social media. We really appreciate it. And for more information, visit us at apodcast.com. Thanks.